Airing on Asheville FM in Asheville, this is The Final Straw Radio, a weekly anarchist and anti-authoritarian broadcasts and podcast emanating out of occupied Chalagi land in southern Appalachia. We bring you voices and perspectives from projects and struggles all around the world, and you can find our archives, transcripts, ways to follow us and support us at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org. Recently, I got to talk with journalist and community organizer Kit O'Connell and anarchist and activist Lorén. Both are trans folks in Austin, Texas, and we speak for the hour about the increasing legal and social oppression of trans and gender non-conforming folks in that state, as well as across the so-called USA, some of its impacts on trans children and children of trans parents, organizing, allyship, and community defense. You can check out our show note for links. And here's a couple really brief announcement. Anarchist prisoner in Texas, Noah Coffin, whose Texas prison number is 1795167, was granted parole 6 months ago in November of 2022, but has not been actually released from Texas Correctional and has not been given a reason why. So there's a request for supporters to give a call to the TDCOJ to check in about why this is the case. You can find links and script in the show notes as well as phone numbers.
If it all blows up and we end up on the news, if you go down, I'm going down too. If you go down, I'm going down too, yeah.
My name is Kit O'Connell. I'm a community organizer and journalist from Austin, Texas. I use they, them pronouns. I'm genderqueer. I am a digital editor with the Texas Observer, and I've been a organizer with various leftist and anti-fascist community groups for years and years now.
Hi, my name is Lorén. I use they, she pronouns. I identify as a genderqueer, trans feminine person. I am sort of a member of this group called QTPIE. We do some fun things. And then, I guess I've been organizing since the Iraq War. That was sort of my first foray into it. And I'm here in Central Texas, continuing that work.
Would you mind saying a few things about QTPIE and what y'all do, or do you want to keep it kind of vague? That's okay.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to talk about QTPIE. I think I hesitate to call it an organization because it honestly operates more as a group chat than anything else, but there is a shared identity within that chat. And it started off with me and then a friend of mine, Max. We were painting some signs for a rally, and it kind of grew and evolved from that, where we started getting together more, we started to commune more, and then, sort of from that, I think people started to notice, and we got more and more people involved in the chat. And now I very much view it as something not quite, I think, to the organizational structure of the MACC up in New York, but it's a similar concept where it's really just a bunch of people that do their own things, kind of come together and talk about the things that they're doing, and then sort of break off into their own little chats and working groups to go from there.
We should say, I think, too, since this is an audio medium, right? It's QT, letter Q, letter T, pi, right?
Yes.
It's fun too.
It's an anagram, an acronym, and a pun, and it stands for Queer and Trans People Illuminate Everything.
Okay. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, the idea behind it is definitely centered. It's around centering queer joy, and sort of the main thing that we put together is a monthly picnic. It doesn't have an official name, which I also like. It changes names like every week or every month. I think I was calling it the Jones Gay Ass Barbecue and Foot Massage, the Queer and Trans Picnic Potluck Extravaganza, the Gay Ass Picnic, just all sorts of like goofy things to remind ourselves that while a lot of things that are happening politically right now are very serious, there's no reason that we have to be serious all the time. especially when we're surrounded by others like us who see us for who we truly are and accept us. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Thank you for illuminating that, and Kit, thanks for asking for for the details on that. Well, I think a lot of this conversation is going to be covering some of the more serious, depressing stuff, but but thank you both for being here, and Kit, thank you so much for your journalism also. So here's my long-winded introduction. The War of Cis Heteropatriarchy its focus on the story of an endangered and weak subject, whether that be imagery of the femme or the child at the hands of what they consider to be the enemy. The gender fascists create a myth of the groomer. In the last 2 years, it's transferred from immigrants and particularly Muslims to now non-cis people. And in the UK, in Russia now, the model is currently moved to homosexuals. In this kind of creep that you see in these countries, it's almost like the same playbook is being enacted in many countries. Maybe that is arguably what's happening. I wonder if y'all could talk a bit about this imagery and the real life impacts of these words and actions on youth and other marginalized people in Texas where you're experiencing it. Or if I got something wrong with the question, please correct me.
No, I think it's interesting that you link what's happening here to what's happening internationally, because we do see it. I mean, especially the first place that comes to my mind is Uganda as well, where LGBTQ folks are literally illegal. But we've seen that there is a concentrated effort by a core group of people through leaked documents here in the so-called United States as well. So it doesn't take that big of a stretch of imagination to say that these people are trying to do the same thing, but globally. And even if I think a lot of times we talk about these conspiracies, these larger things that are happening, as if there's a core group of 7 people in a room, tapping their fingers together maniacally and coming up with these plans. But it doesn't take that for it to happen, for other people with similar interests to sort of look at what's happening and then sort of follow the same model. Just like the same's true with, the 1%. They're not all getting together in a boardroom and doing these things. They're just each individually taking action that protects themselves, which in essence protects their group, their 1% group. And I think that's probably more than likely what's happening here as well. It'd be great if it was a singular cadre, because then those people could be dealt with. But it's more insidious than that. I don't know, Kit, what do you have to say?
I mean, that's the essential appeal of the superhero comic, right? Is that we could find the people responsible for, say, climate change and punch them in the nose. But it's never that simple. But we do know there is some international coordination, and I think Lauren put it very accurately that some of it is following the playbook. Seeing what works in one place and helping, repeating that in another. But we do also see, coordination across countries. We know that in Uganda, for example, that, American conservatives consulted with some of those officials. There was a recent leak. Wired magazine broke the story just the other day about a leak from the American College of Pediatrics, which is an anti-trans, anti-abortion, anti-premarital sex, super conservative organization, and supposedly doctors, that's meant to sound like the American College of Pediatricians, which is what everyone's heard of. But they sponsor, this American College of Pediatrics sponsors a lot of, or is involved in a lot of, the anti-trans and anti-abortion legislation. We can see them coordinating with other groups. Even in these leaked files, we can see them consulting. I think it's with some officials in Bulgaria, I want to say. So we do know that there is some international coordination to achieve these overall aims of, I guess, restricting bodily autonomy, whether that's reproductive freedoms or LGBTQIA plus freedoms. It's very intersectional from their side as well as from ours.
And obviously, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's just very interesting, because for 8 years, it seemed like the rhetoric was sort of at least dying down on a national stage. They struck down the law in Texas that made sodomy illegal. Gay marriage became a thing finally. And then there was a big turn. What was that, like 9 years ago? Where I don't think people's ideas changed. I think that they were given permission to more freely speak what they had already been thinking. And so in terms of like real world repercussions, the increased harassment on the street, the increase in policing and othering of people in everyday life has been a very real effect, post 2016. People talk about all the time when I tell them that I live, in this little blue dot in a sea of red. They're like, oh, well, at least that's nice. But I think we all know that, like, liberal democracies paved the way for fascism. And it's still, as I walk around the streets, I'm harassed on a daily basis. Not just looks, but like, people verbally accosting me. I can't sit down at like a shared table and not have a family that has a small child, like pick that child up and move to another table because of that groomer rhetoric that's been passed around with me. It's made it much more difficult for visible trans people, to sort of make it through. Whereas people in 2013 may have been like, oh, like RuPaul. Now it's I'm a man in a dress and I'm a groomer. And that takes a psychological toll, even if it doesn't put me, in necessarily like physical harm's way every time. It doesn't put me in jail when people, say and do these things. But, moving through this world as somebody with, tits and a beard, it's a challenge. And I think that's true no matter where you are at this point, even though people want to focus on the 26 states that are enacting anti-LGBTQ policies. It's sort of like complaining that, oh, well, it's very similar, I think, in fact, to how people talk about racism. And they're like, well, it's really bad in the South, but here we're not racist. And I'm like, no, New York, you still are. Like, very clearly you have things to work through. And I think transphobia is very much in the same way, where it's not the South per se, but it's the red states and the blue states dialogue. And people don't understand that it can be just as dangerous in California as it is in Texas. And all that. The only distinction is that the transphobia may take a slightly different form, but it's still there and it's still insidious.
I guess also I want to add too, just in terms of consequences, I'm glad you brought that up again because that's important. We already have, I'm going to use a term that journalists use mostly about other countries. We have internally displaced people in the United States who are essentially internal refugees from the states that they were born or raised in. I know people, one that I can talk about because she's been in the news publicly is a young woman named Kai Shapley. And Kai Shapley was raised in a conservative family, came out at a lot of personal consequence as trans, ended up testifying at, I believe, 7 years old against the first wave of sort of bathroom bills that we saw. Some of those were beaten back. She ended up having to move from her small town in Texas to Austin, because again, it's that blue dot, and she knew she could go to school here and, have at least sort of a surface level of respect of her pronouns and her family's choices. But then, just over the last year, as the state has opened child abuse investigations against parents of, trans kids simply because they have trans kids and are accepting their identities, she's had to leave the state. I did a photo essay collaboration with this artist, Jesse Frieden, in our magazine, which is this beautiful photo essay of trans and gender non-conforming young people just really expressing themselves. And the photographer had planned to photograph Kai Shapley and had made plans with her. And by the time, he got to Texas to do the photography, she'd already had to pull up stakes and flee the state.
Yeah, I know personally, I know 6 families that have transgender children that have already left this state for safer states. And we do see that happening a lot. And, people ask me, when am I moving? Because I have a 14-year-old who is also trans. And, the reality is like, one, I can't afford it. Moving across the country is a huge expense. And then two, why should I have to move? You're the one that sucks. You move. This is my home and I have every right to be here. And then lastly, there are going to be trans kids born here tomorrow. And I'm staying for those first two reasons, but I'm also staying because somebody needs to be here to fight for that, because they will be here. And just if all of the trans people leave the red states and go to a quote unquote blue state, that doesn't mean that there won't be any trans people in that state anymore, because there will be. And now it'll be even more dangerous because there have been no systems and no communities that have a place for them when they figure out who they are. I think that's probably one of the most dangerous things about this internal displacement that I don't see people talking about. I understand why people leave for their safety. I understand why people leave for their children. We all have an acceptable level of risk that we're willing to accept. We all have sort of our baseline quality of life that we're willing to accept. And once you fall below that threshold, I'm not trying to dog on anybody that is leaving or has left or is thinking about it, because, that's your choice and you do what you need to take care of you. But at the same time, we do need people to stay here and fight because the kids are going to be here tomorrow.
So it makes a lot of sense. What you're saying definitely makes a lot of sense to me, that folks staying behind, that not just emptying the apparent landscape of trans folks creates in a lot of ways a less supportive and more dangerous situation for the folks that are to come, or the folks that are going to need to transition in various ways to make themselves more public and therefore maybe more of a target. A friend of mine, Margaret Killjoy,
Love her work. They're so cool. Yeah.
She had put out a very public call on a couple of social media saying that cis folks need to start speaking out and acting up in support of their trans family and comrades and community. I wonder if you have any examples that you can think of cis comrades stepping up and speaking out, and not just speaking out, but also acting in solidarity with what the trans communities are going through, or ways that you think that people should challenge themselves to step into that role and be more active.
Yeah, that's really funny. I have 3 cis friends, and literally everybody else is trans and non-binary, which, the T for T lifestyle is a very, very common thing. Of course, you want to be surrounded by people who understand you in a way that a lot of other people can't. And so there's an attraction to being sort of in that space. But all 3 people that I am friends with who are cisgender are wildly active. And I think that's the only reason that we are friends, is because I do see them doing things, and I know that they are, backing up their feelings with actions. One friend is very good at putting his body in the way to protect trans people from harm. And I've seen him do so on multiple occasions, helping, trans people stay safe by making himself not safe. I think that's definitely an extreme example, but that's one that I think a lot of cis people could learn from, is that you have that opportunity to use your cis privilege when being confronted with threats either from the state or from non-state actors. And you can use that privilege to protect people because you are less likely to come to harm than they will. I've got another friend, her name is Lorén, which is really fun. We hang out all the time. She spells it a little differently. People always pronounce her name Lorén and pronounce my name Lauren when it's flip-flopped. But she's got a mouth And she uses that mouth. She's a storyteller. She hops on stages. She does open mic nights and that kind of thing. And so she's very comfortable speaking to crowds. And so the thing that I see her doing very often is using that voice of hers in places that are both on and off the stage to correct people when they misgender, to call people out when they say transphobic things. And I know, I mean, she does that in my presence, and I know that she does that outside of my presence as well. And then my third friend is not loud and is not big, but he has found his way to utilize his cisgender privilege by consistently showing up to everything, every event, every rally, every march, standing there in solidarity with us. I think those are three wonderful examples of things that cis people can do that you should do.
Those are great examples. I think there's almost infinite ways to do something. It's just, at this point, I'm happy just to see people doing something. Like, we can argue about utility and what's the best tactic and stuff, but I just want people to get off their butts, because too many of them are just sitting down and watching. And it feels like even some of the people that were engaged kind of in the last wave of legislation have stayed silent during this wave of it, and I don't fully understand why that is. Speaking out is valuable. You know, you can do online research and help, figure out who's responsible for things, help identify people that are harming trans and queer people, the kind of online anti-fascist research. I am fortunate enough to work with a number of cisgender allies that have been extremely helpful in, helping our communities be safer. And sometimes that has been physically putting themselves in between, the potential harm and the person who would be vulnerable to it. And sometimes it's, virtually doing so as well. That can be really valuable. People dog on, online activism, and there's valid criticisms of that, but it's also, it is a place we all live our lives these days. And so there are a lot of ways for people to plug in, doing online research, making phone calls when it's necessary. We recently had a transphobic organization holding a conference in town, and we were able to successfully get 3 different venues to kick them out. And they ended up essentially having to retreat to sort of right-wing think tank offices to hold their events. And while it didn't shut them down, it very clearly illustrated the connections that they have, and we certainly made their lives a little more miserable. And that was done by phone calls, and that's not enough. It's not going to save trans kids that need access to healthcare tomorrow after it's been made illegal, but it's a step, and it just makes everything function a little less smoother for the people that want to run us over. And I think that just every little act of throwing yourselves in the way of that genocidal machinery, I have to hope it's going to add up.
Well, I think that's a really wonderful point, where it's like literally everything and anything that you can do adds to it. And I think beyond just simply adding to the fact that it's accomplishing like a task, like kicking the TERFs out of a venue, or standing up to protesters of a drag show. Those moments are also really significant in solidifying the trust and sense of community that people have with each other as they're like sort of moving through this. I'm seeing a lot of new people this go around, a lot of new activists, trans and otherwise, coming to this with, really wide eyes and a lot of energy. And it's been nice to see how things like that have sort of solidified the relationship that people have to each other in the hopes of creating something bigger, in the hopes of making us safer in the future.
I think that's really all those examples are really inspirational. So, I mean, a lot of this, there's definitely, Lorén, for instance, you've talked about the real life impacts of just regularized transphobia on the street and you getting harassed. Like, I would imagine that your kid has also gotten a lot of shit at school at various points.
I've had 3 separate meetings with the vice principal and the principal about targeted bullying at school. My kid gets called a tranny and a fag by other students. And this is not surprising considering the area that the school is in. It's definitely like a redder part of the place, of the region. But yeah, it's awful.
And I think that there's something like, I think that our strength as communities is by forming community, by forming affinity, by seeing the humanity in each other and being willing to do community defense around that in all the different ways that you've described, whether it be phone numbers or showing up in person or putting your body on the line. But so another part of this, and a reinforcing part of this, what I would say is increasing wave, the like social acceptability of transphobia and generalized like gender fascism that's going on, is also underpinned by or supported by legislation and court decisions by these institutional organizations. And some of those are backed by like private foundations or church groups or whatever, but these bigger examples of things that are outside of the realm necessarily of the community organizing level. Like, I'm an anarchist myself. I have difficulty engaging with these bigger organizations and feeling good about the way that I'm putting energy in, calling representatives or engaging with electoral politics. But I understand that that's also like one of the big levers that is creating bans on bathrooms, like threatening criminal processes against people for supporting other people getting abortions, or or doctors or parents for allowing kids to get healthcare that will help them live their lives and be happy with who they are. And so I know that like Kit had shared with me a flyer from Tuesday calling for people to come down to the State House to show up, make noise, be in support of each other, and also to vocalize resistance to the ongoing wave of transphobic laws that are being passed in the state of Texas. I wonder, how you all feel about engaging on that level. Does that feel fruitful? Does it feel like banging your head against the wall? Does that matter?
Yeah, so I too identify as an anarchist and have been organizing those spaces for the last 20 years. I like to tell people that I lost faith in electoral politics a long time ago. But I think, the QTPIEs did call for a Pack the Gallery event, along with a couple of other like liberal organizations, like I think Equality Texas and the Texas Freedom Network did as well. And I think our justification for doing such is not that we're under no pretense that that's going to change the outcome. We're under no pretense that that's going to stop a law from being passed. But what we do operate it as is that it's a place, one, that can be potentially very cathartic, to be disruptive and in the faces of these elected representatives. Two, it's a trust building and community building exercise. And then three, it makes us more visible, which I think is a good thing. And now hear me out. There's a lot of talk about what makes a good anarchist. The joke that I've always heard is you're only a good anarchist if even your roommates don't know your last name.
Yeah.
Which I understand that, but at the same time, so many of our groups and organizations, and affinity groups have been centered around this idea of like, black masks, code names, nobody knows us, so that we can do these things that we're trying to do. But that leaves no room for people to access you, for people who are on the verge of being radicalized, or those who have been radicalized by experience, by lived experience, and are looking for people who are the same ilk. And so it's in doing these more visible actions that confront the electoral body in a way that makes us accessible to people who are looking for us, even though they don't know that they're looking for us. So that's in my head how I justify chanting at the State House and getting kicked out of the gallery as an anarchist.
Yeah, sometimes it just helps to let the people in charge know how angry you are, even if it doesn't stop them from doing what they're going to do, but just being like, no, we're here, you're not going to erase us, and you're going to hear from us again. to me, one value of showing up in their house, the legislature, to protest. I've been involved in my share of those, and I often think back to the really extraordinary moment in 2013 during when Wendy Davis had her filibuster. People talk about her side of it a lot, but they talk less about the fact that the Capitol was filled to the brim with people protesting and chanting. And when Wendy Davis's filibuster failed, people's chanting was so loud that the lawmakers literally couldn't do their business. The legislative session ended and the bill didn't get passed. Now, that was this amazing moment of victory. It felt incredibly powerful. Of course, the next day, the governor declared a special session to force the bill through anyway, which is what ended up happening, right? And we have to ask ourselves, does that completely devalue what happened before, that moment before of us chanting and shutting things down? And as radicals, whether we call ourselves anarchists or not, I think it's a question we discuss. And to me, it is still valuable, right? We did create these connections. We gave people this moment where they felt like literally the halls of power shaking with our voices. It's a granite building and it was vibrating. We were being so loud in there. And that was great, But yeah, then the question is, how do we keep building on that? And how do we make people stay in the game, stay in what we're doing longer than just that one moment? It's one of the reasons I appreciate so much the work that QTPIE does in making like picnics and things, because I've always been a believer in both like celebrating the small victories, but also somebody, and I wish I could remember who told me this, but just like the idea of like for every protest, a barbecue. And I just really like that, just like we need to get together and build community. And, when I go out and protest and I see who's willing to put their bodies on the line, that teaches me something about them that I take into my other interactions with them. But I also learned something from going to the picnic and seeing who is willing to cook for us and, who's helping to pick up and who's, being a part of the community in other ways. And it is really easy to get lost at the Capitol here, especially at the Texas Capitol. It's just got this huge lawn leading up to it, and people go and protest at those Capitol steps, and they're just like these invisible little dots. And so in some ways, I am very cynical about what goes on down there. But on the other hand, seeing the activists that did get the gallery cleared the other day, this week, that was powerful, that you made so much noise and so much disruption that they basically had to shut down the Texas Capitol in order to do any business this time around. I just, we have to hope it builds into something more that maybe happens outside those walls.
Yeah, exactly. Building into something more outside of the walls has to be the end goal. Anytime, somebody who's on the left side of the spectrum is participating in things like this. Because the reality is, if the goal is to create a parallel system of power that is able to meet our basic needs and is able to take care of each other and ourselves, the only way we have that power is with people. And so people who trust each other, people who believe in each other, people who show up from each other. And it's somehow, somewhere, these people have to meet each other, whether that's at a picnic or whether it's at an action or, whatever it looks like. That has to be the goal.
Yeah, we have to have on-ramps to this kind of work too. I think there's so many people out there that just, they want to be involved and they don't know where to get plugged in. And it's better than nothing if they go get involved in one of the mainstream nonprofits. I'm glad they're doing something rather than nothing, like I said. But, what if we have a door that's open for them to walk through? And yeah, maybe, a couple people are standing by that metaphorical door, vetting the people as they walk through a little bit. But we still have to have a door open. And I think there is that tendency on the left for understandable reasons because of infiltration and attacks and all the things we deal with to, just build our own walls around our communities and not let others in. But the reality is that there are ways to organize, by building like affinity groups of people you trust. You can then use those affinity groups as a launching place to work with larger groups of people that are somewhat less vetted, that are more open to other people. And, that allows for a lot of stuff that doesn't require a top grade security culture, like a banner drop. You want to be careful to protect that, but you don't need 256-bit PGP encryption and a Tor browser to do that, right? You can invite your neighbor to come to a banner drop if you think they're sympathetic. That is something you can do and should do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was also a really powerful moment that we saw in the State House, is like, I know there's been some banner drops that happened around the city this legislative session, but to see not one, but two separate banner drops happen in the state capitol on Tuesday was amazing. There was a huge banner dropped in the rotunda, and then there were two more banners that were dropped inside the House gallery itself before it was cleared by the speaker. And I do think that those are really powerful moments. I view a lot of people that come from those other liberal organizations and who are rallied by them as like ripe for radicalization. I'm often fond of saying that people are radicalized two ways, right? They're either radicalized by theory. They read Foucault and they're like, oh yeah, this makes a lot of sense. Or they're radicalized by experience. And I think the people that we're seeing at the Capitol right now are people who are being radicalized by their lived experience. It is almost exclusively trans and queer people, and occasionally a smattering of like lesbian and gay allies. There's almost no cishet people there. It's astounding how much little action the larger cis hetero population has taken at the state capitol with anything having to do with these anti-LGBTQ policies. And I think that's actually pushing the queer and trans folks a little bit farther and a little bit more radical, is because they're realizing that we don't really have allies outside of our community.
If you would like to support The Final Straw, you can subscribe to our podcast via various platforms, follow and share our materials online, as well as give us feedback via the links at tfsr.wtf/tree, as in Linktree. To support our transcription work and wider project, you can subscribe to us via patreon.com/tfsr. You can also buy some merch or find donation methods at tfsr.wtf/support.
We also plan to pre-release a number of other chats in coming weeks that will take a while to find their way out into the main podcast stream. Keep an eye on our Patreon podcast stream, including our interview with one of the authors of We Go Where They Go, A History of Anti-Racist Action Around the Turn of the Millennium, an interview with comic artist and collagist Johnny Dam, an interview with trans femme anti-fascists in the UK about the recent violence in Liverpool as fascists attempt to attack refugees held up in a hotel, Devi Machete of Contraviento y Marea Comedor, a mutual aid space run by anarchists and refugees in Tijuana, Mexico, and many more topics. The Final Straw is a proud member of the Channel Zero network of anarchist podcasts, and here's a jingle from another member of CZN.
It's going down, and you're invited for what they selling. We ain't buying. There is no running. There is no hiding. There's only fighting or dying. It's going down, and you're invited for what they selling. We ain't buying. There is no running. There is no hiding. There's only fighting or dying.
It's Going Down is a digital community center from anarchist, anti-fascist, autonomous, anti-capitalist, and anti-colonial movements. Our mission is to provide an autonomous and resilient platform to publicize and promote revolutionary theory and action.
Go to itsgoingdown.org for daily updates. Check out our online store for ways to donate, and rate and follow us on iTunes if you like this podcast.
Kit had mentioned one of the groups that had been chased out of a few venues trying to have their public event. And I wonder if you all have a roster of any like organizations that you can name that are behind some of this legislation that's harming so many people in the state of Texas that you'd want to name out for people to keep on their radars.
I mean, I mentioned the American College of Pediatrics earlier just because there has been this big leak of documents from them, and I'm hoping there's going to be some more stories out of that. The Wired article was pretty surface, but that's understandable. There's like, I've got a hard drive with like 40 gigs worth of files on it, so it's a lot to sort through. It's a tough question because it's like, do we want to give those people, more of a platform or not? I mean, honestly, it's at this point a mainstream Texas GOP position too, right? I mean, we can talk about the funders, but those funders are also just essentially the funders of the Republican Party.
Yeah.
It's not.
It's
not
literally
separate
on their
from
platform. Sorry.
Yeah, they tweet about it. One of my articles recently was about the Texas Department of Agriculture They now have their workers now have to follow a transphobic dress code. The dress code says they have to follow, quote unquote, their biological gender, which is not a thing. Like, gender isn't biological, but that's what it says. And, you know, the agricultural commissioner's elected position here, he's just tweeting, you know, I guess he doesn't have anything to do with agriculture, actually, because he spends his day lately tweeting about, you know, how much he hates trans people and how dangerous we are, you know. And so that's like the agriculture commissioner. I think, I don't know, to me that kind of drives home just how mainstream, like, even people who, like, I feel like, you know, that's someone who was I'm sure was our enemy 10 years ago, you know, in all kinds of ways. But for them to be so openly just like, yep, I hate trans people, this is my mainstream position that will win me votes. I think it speaks to where things have gotten with that. And, you know, we do see a lot of the, you know, regulars of white supremacy here. Of course, Patriot Front essentially is based out of Texas, you know, as one example. But to me, it's really the most dangerous. Yeah, you know, it's like the lobbyists and the Republicans that are essentially trying to take power. That, you know, not to absolve the Democrats of responsibility, but the Republicans are so actively planning for a genocide in this moment that, you know, we can call out the funders, we can call out the people investing in these things, and I think that is valuable. But I think, to me right now, it's just most important just to say it's system wide at this point, and they want to take what's happening in these red states and make it nationwide, and they're very close to doing that. It is happening everywhere at this point in one form or another.
Lorén had mentioned the gathering wider, like, queer LGBTQIA community, like, coming out in support for community defense to events like this, recognizing, like, a commonality of this encroachment, this, like, it's targeting one specific, more, like, systematically marginalized part of this wider community, and it's going to continue, like, peeling back the layers of onion and getting further and further in. So it's, when they come for trans youth, they're going to come for trans adults. When they come for those communities, they're going to be coming for gay, lesbian folks, non-binary folks. Like, it's just going to continue, because that is the drive that a lot of the Christian fundamentalists are coming from anyway. I have heard over the last few years of some success in some places of TERFs, for instance, recruiting gay and lesbian, or being gay and lesbian organizers, and dropping the T off of LGBTQ. And I wonder, have you seen that sort of thing happening? Is that a thing am I just blowing it out of proportion because there's just a couple of wingnuts in the world that are loud? Or is this something to watch out for? And how do you think that, like, the wider, like, queer community is doing?
Well, I think we definitely, I mean, on a national stage, I think we see, you know, gay people who sort of fit this description of LGB drop the T movements. I don't think that it is in any way or form a wave that's moving through the community. I do believe these to be relatively isolated based on my experience. And this is something like, you know, there's like, I'm being asked to speak at the Dyke March for Pride next month. You know, as a trans person, I'm intentionally being centered and put in front of this. And so there are groups out there that see what's happening and remain sympathetic because they understand that. I think I did some quick math. Austin has the third largest amount of LGBTQ people by per capita of any city in the United States. There's over 135,000 LGBTQ plus people in Austin, period, which is a lot. In the Austin metro area, I guess I should say. And then based on other, there's a 2022 census study that said that in Texas, 0.52% of Texans identify as transgender, which puts, if I had to extrapolate the number in Austin, considering that they tend to be a little bit denser and urban than rural areas, anywhere between 10 to 20,000 transgender identifying people in just the city limits, probably closer to 30,000, up to 30,000 if we're looking at the Austin metro area. And I think the really frustrating thing about that for me is I know that these people aren't LGBT people, because I do see that being a very small percentage, but I haven't seen 135,000 people at the state capitol. I haven't seen 20,000 people inside the rotunda. I haven't seen 15,000 people try to pack in the House gallery and make noise. And I guess maybe we're just not at that point yet, but that's why I think what we see happening right now is so important, is that we're creating these doors and these focal points, because if it's not now, and it's going to be in 2024, if they take, the national elections, if Republicans take national elections, and if it's not in 2024, it's going to be in 2025 when it happens in our state house again. And that, to me, that's 135,000 people who are about to have nothing to lose. And I'm just wondering, I don't know if they don't accept it yet, if they don't understand where the risk is at, if they haven't lost it, so they're not willing to do something that could risk losing it. I don't know where everybody is. I look at what's happening in 2020, where we had these, the cops killed a man, and they had been killing men, and everybody stood up and said enough is enough. And we had riots, demonstrations, and defunding of police all over the country, and that's not happening here, even though it is happening all over the country. The response in my, limited understanding and my limited worldview from this one little place that I have out of my apartment, I'm like looking at this going, where is it? Where's the outrage? Where are the people who care about this? Because I know even if we never saw 20,000 people in the street around the state capitol when we were doing the George Floyd rebellion, if we could get all 20,000 of those people here right now, what could be possible? And so that I think the question for us is why those people who are being directly affected by it choose to not take action. Because I can sit here and I can complain about our cishet allies all day long, and I will, because you need to be in the streets with us. But I'm also looking at the rest of our community and saying, where are you? Where is this outrage that I know that you have? I know that you're capable of. I saw you in the streets 3 years ago, and now it's on us. And you're not here? That doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make any sense to me. And I'm tired of trying to make it make sense.
I completely agree with everything you just said, Lorén. You're a really wise person, and I appreciate being on this with you. One thing, I've been attending a couple events recently and maybe writing about for the magazine, is this local drag troupe called Vanguard, which is a Black-led drag troupe here in town. And the leader of it, Her Majesty the Hung, is very deliberate about invoking this political moment at every event. It's not just a drag show, but Her Majesty starts it by talking about the importance of trans rights, queer rights, bodily autonomy. All bodies are beautiful. There's this litany every time about almost like creating a political space out of the drag show. And, I think, to me, one thing is, let's keep having the celebrations, let's keep having the drag shows, let's keep building joyful queer culture, but let's also not be afraid to bring politics into those spaces and speak up, because those spaces reach, both the cis allies that might act and our own community that is still, unfortunately apathetic about how bad things are getting or about to get. So I want to give respect to Her Majesty and the Vanguard troupe, because I think that's a great example of turning these events into something more powerful. And of course, it's the Black community leading it here, where they've been under pressure for the longest. So.
Yeah, and to that same point, I really appreciate you mentioning Vanguard, because you're right. Her Majesty is doing not only phenomenal political activist work, but her drag performances as well are so politically charged and esoteric and pushing the boundaries. They're really, really spectacular. We've also got Bridget Bandit, who is being an incredibly vocal ally, who's another drag performer here in Austin, that not only like shows up at the State House, but also shows up and is political in her drag shows as well. And then the folks, the ballroom community, I'm thinking specifically of like House Lepore, very much kind of doing the same thing. And I think that's the point, though, that I think makes me even more frustrated, is because it's not just you making noise. It's not just me making noise. It's not just Equality Texas and the Texas Freedom Network like making noise. It's already out there in the community. Our entertainers, and our activists, and making that noise, and the people aren't coming like they should be coming. I didn't mean that to sound as dirty as it was, but you're welcome.
It's only dirty if you want it to be.
And they do.
For me, it's beautiful and amazing, and obviously like a self-sustaining like life force thing that people continue to have public events, and that people continue to have, like, whether it be like drag events in bars that are directed towards adults that are more burlesque, or reading events meant for kids. When I think of like hard places in the country to be out and trans, I think of Texas and I think of Florida, like, above all. But as has been said, it's everywhere. Have you seen a lot of opposition, like violent, like reactionary opposition and threats to shut down spaces and to shut down events? Has that continued? Has that built? Has that stayed like a steady? Is it the same assholes doing it?
Yeah, no, there was I think last month there was a drag show that was protested by armed protesters in San Antonio, but was met with counter protesters. There's another one that's happening here in Austin on Saturday, I believe, that there are people intending to protest. And so there are people signing up to be counter protesters as well. And so, yeah, no, people are definitely taking that cowboy action, of being their own, law enforcement or moral enforcement or whatever, twisted ideas they have in their mind about what they are and what's happening. It is absolutely the case, but it is being met by our community with as much force as we can muster. My only fear is that it's going to end in violence. It's going to end in violence. I mean, hell, the Garrett Foster trial just ended, and this was an event that happened 3 years ago. And it took that long for that man to be put to justice. And I would hate for us to see something like that happen to galvanize people into action, or to like call more attention to the imminent threat, the nature of the imminent threat that this is to us, the existential crisis that we're falling into. But honestly, a part of me is really worried that that's what is going to have to happen for some people to like wake up and see that when we use the word genocide, we're not using it lightly. We're not using it for shock value. We're using it because this is the actual and full intent of this rhetoric and of these laws.
They straight up said out loud now that they want to eradicate transgender people. They said that at CPAC, and they can try to weasel out of it, but we all heard what they said. I mean, I wish more people heard it. Something that I always try to emphasize, I'm not the only person to say this, but just, genocide's not just putting people into camps. It's a whole process, and it is also making it impossible for a community to live. It's not just putting the bullets to their head, it's making it so they can't access healthcare, so that they can't access education freely, so that they can't, go out in a public place and pee if they need to pee, and we kind of, that doesn't feel so significant until you think about what it would mean to not be able to go anywhere and pee when you go out in public. And I think cis people don't really think about what that's going to mean, because it's just such a background part of their life. But This is essentially about public participation. This is about, about making it impossible as they can to exist as an LGBTQIA plus person in so-called Texas. And, that is genocide as surely as if they were collecting us into the camps already. And, they want to eradicate transgender people. And it's as simple as that. And I don't even know. I'm at a loss for words to say about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's what it is. And I think much in the same way that people get mocked for calling people Nazis or fascists, because it seems to be one of those words that's quote unquote overused when, you just have somebody that you disagree with, you can end the argument by calling them a fascist. But I think the reality of that word is it's because there are a lot of fascists out there. That's why you're hearing this word a lot. And the same is true for genocide, genocidal rhetoric and genocidal laws. This is not hyperbole. This is not an attempt to win an easy internet argument. It is because this is exactly what you are seeing. And for some people, it's going to take a lot more for them to internalize and understand that is exactly what's happening here. Florida wants to take away children who are being affirmed by their parents. They also want to take away children from transgender parents. They're trying to do that in Texas as well through the Family Protective Services. I have a folder that's full of information from doctors and therapists and friends and teachers that outlines how much I love my child, so that if that Family Protective Services does come after us, I have supporting documents in the moment where I can say, no, this is not child abuse. No, I love my child. Yes, I know what I'm doing, and this is the best thing that I can do for them. I'm on a list here already. The Attorney General asked the Texas DPS, the Department of Public Safety, for a list of individuals who have submitted for a gender marker change in their documents, right? That's a list of trans people that Ken Paxton, who's been indicted for 3 felonies, by the way, that's a list that Ken Paxton has of trans-identified people in this state. How does this not begin to look like genocide? You're breaking apart families. You're making lists. You're trying to remove the opportunity for insurance and healthcare that is life-affirming healthcare. How long is it before I can be fired for being trans? How long is it before I can be kicked out of my house or my apartment for being trans? These are very real things. And look, I'm not drawing a correlation to the Weimar Republic, right? Because the historical circumstances are very different. But whenever you say genocide or whenever you say Holocaust, that's what people go to. And like Kit said, that's not the only thing that genocide can look like. It can look like exactly what's happening right now. I'm so fucking tired.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So I've spoken with some comrades who grew up in reactionary Christian communities in the so-called USA, who view what we're seeing now with the legalized attacks on healthcare access and against queer folks as the death throes of an ideology whose time has come to pass, as many younger folks measurably have expressed feeling in studies. My personal feeling is that that's optimism speaking, and that this is part of a long-term and well-planned out strategy to further disenfranchise the majority of the population, a la the origins of the fascist settler state. So I wonder if you all have an assessment of this sort of back and forth, these two different ideas, and what's coming next, and how we should prepare for that part in the fight for liberation.
Fascism doesn't go out with a whimper. Fascism is not something that simply dies. The person who, what's his name? Michael Knowles, who called for the eradication of transgenderism in public life, quote unquote, is my age. And sure, I might be, I guess, a little bit older, and it's kind of harder to accept sometimes. But just because it's a legislature full of old white men doesn't mean that there's not a cadre of young white men ready to take up arms and follow in their position. So I don't think it's optimism necessarily to say like that this is a dying ideology. I think it's naivete to say that. This is not something that you can let die. This is something that you must force to die, because that is the only way that fascism has ever died.
Yeah, I mean, the founder of Patriot Front was under 21 when he started that organization. And I think that's another example. Every anti-fascist protest I've been at where we've confronted fascists, there's always been some young people that were brought along by their parents at that event. I remember this was like 2012. So, I mean, pre-Trump, when all this seemed kind of, far off, this moment, I attended with some comrades. We were like the 3 people counter protesting at the massive rally for life that they hold every year here in Texas. And, Dan Patrick, now the lieutenant governor, got up and spoke at that and said, in our lifetime, we're going to eradicate abortion and gay marriage. And people cheered, tens of thousands of people cheered. And, there were whole Boy Scout troops at that. It's something we have to fight. We have to out-organize, and we have to out-fight them. And this is a moment when people are going to be asked to make hard decisions to protect their communities, I think. And I hope that willing to choose, the right side, that's the side of humanity in these coming moments when they're asked to make tough choices about, following orders.
Lorén and Kit, thank you both for having this conversation with me. I really appreciate you taking the time and talking about some really depressive but ever looming issues. Are there, if you wouldn't mind, like reiterating ways that people can, if you have work online, find your work, or if someone's in the Austin area and they want to show up at one of those barbecues as a friend, if that's or should they just like make friends and then ask around, or is there a way to interface with y'all?
Yeah, so I say the Instagram account for the picnic is just at the letter Q, the letter T, PIE, P-I-E, picnic, P-I-C-N-I-C. So QTPIE picnic. It sort of puts together, the next flyer and some information about where to go to the barbecue and how to bring picnic supplies if you want to do that. We also, I don't know if this has sort of made it out of Texas per se, but at the action at the Capitol on Tuesday, there were a couple of protesters who were caught up by DPS. They've been released. They put out on PR bonds, which is wonderful. But we quickly realized that we didn't have a trans legal fund put together yet. So the QTPIEs have put together one that's sort of operating as now, that can also be found on the Instagram.
And then you can find me as Kit O'Connell on just about every big social network. I'm no longer active on Twitter, though. You need to find me on Mastodon as Kit O'Connell. I'm on a couple places there. And I work for a 16-year-old publication called the Texas Observer, which covers kind of a pretty wide umbrella of the left. So that includes the liberal left as well as the radicals up to the further left like us. And, I'll just say one of the ways to act in this world that is helpful is to support journalists who you appreciate, whether that's podcasters or independent media groups like Unicorn Riot or whatever. So they do some amazing work. Or it's left-leaning publications like the Texas Observer, or reaching out directly to reporters that have Patreons that you like their work. The old model of journalism is dying for good and for ill. And, but the way to see that there's more than just the right-wing platforms left when this all shakes out is we need people to throw their capitalist resources our way.
And your publication just recently pulled together and saved itself through a crowdfunding, right? Is there a
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, we almost had our doors shut. We have a brand new board of directors that's much more supportive of what we're doing. And if you want to help keep us alive, the best way right now is just to become a member at texasobserver.org/join, JOIN. And there's a 99-cent a month option that you can get on. And even that helps because it does help kind of boost our numbers when we go to the rich people that sometimes throw big checks our way. So, every bit actually really does help. And so I appreciate everybody that goes to support the Texas Observer and, any local media that matters to you.
As a note on Sean's segment for this episode, Alfredo Cospito actually ended his hunger strike this week after Sean made this call. You can read more at abolitionmedia.noblogs.org.
In case you missed it yesterday, the deadbeat formerly known as Prince Charles got coronated King of England, Charles III. My guess is you probably missed it. The only anarchists I know who are up at 5 in the morning are likely toilet papering homes of government officials or smacking mailboxes with baseball bats. A bit of historical context here. Royalty is what people used to care about before the advent of television and soap operas. Some kings came to power by virtue of smacking enemies in the face with rocks propelled from slingshots. Others pulled swords out of rocks. They usually got wealthy sitting around, kind of like the Kardashians. Charles, the guy coronated King of England yesterday, is the son of Queen Elizabeth, who ruled from 1952. Charles is 74 years old, the longest heir apparent in British history, which means he has now finally gotten a job 9 years after the official U.S. retirement age. Charles appeared last year in 181 public engagements, which is about equivalent to the touring schedule of professional wrestlers, only without turnbuckles and rings and with significantly smaller crowds. Recent royal scandals include Prince Andrew hanging out with a prolific pedophile, and Charles's son Harry and his wife Meghan revealing to Oprah the bombshell that the royal family, who has been inbreeding white people for 1,000 years, is a bunch of racists. Go figure. Nobody saw that coming. In June of 2022, Charles, seemingly in response to the accusation of royal racism, spoke in Rwanda and came out with the controversial position of opposing slavery. He said, "I cannot describe the depths of my personal sorrow at the suffering of so many as I continue to deepen my own understanding of slavery's enduring impact." I'm not sure what any of that really means. That sounds like royal speak for, I'm going to try hard to be less of a turd in the future. According to a recent poll, only 48% of Brits planned on watching this crap. It seems that British citizens are as enthusiastic about their oppressor as Americans are of Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Anyway, if it went as planned, this is how it went. Charles and Camilla arrived at Westminster Abbey in the Diamond Jubilee State Coach. It had 6 hydraulic stabilizers for comfort, and it looked something like Elton John would have driven through the Wild West. The Archbishop of Canterbury then smeared Charles with oil on his head, hands, and chest, as if he planned to fry and eat him rather than crown him. The anthem for the coronation, by the way, is Zadok the Priest, which gained fame in 1727 at King George II's coronation. It topped the Billboard charts, only knocked out of number 1 in 1729 by While My Harpsichord Gently Weeps. At his crowning, Charles is supposed to have been provided spurs, bracelets, an orb, and a ring, although the ring isn't placed on his finger, since Queen Victoria had the ring placed on the wrong finger. Want to know what finger they put it on? I think we know. Then Charles is handed a scepter and a rod, 2 obvious phallic symbols. After Charles gets crowned, Camilla also gets smeared with oil and crowned Queen Consort, which sounds like a position out of Game of Thrones, a position you'd expect to involve a paddle and a lot of nudity. But no. If the Game of Thrones folks were producing this, more than 48% of Brits would watch it. Hand of the King. That means two things. They then hand Camilla two phallic symbols of her own, and they play some anthem by Andrew Lloyd Webber, the guy who did Phantom of the Opera on Broadway. Later, Camilla and Charles make an appearance on the balcony at Buckingham Palace in front of the 12 people of the world who still think this monarchy is legitimate. By the time this broadcast airs, the coronation will have already occurred, so you'll know if I was successful or not with my suggested revisions to the ritual process. See, there's an email, ask@cdc.ca, where you can submit suggestions that will then be forwarded directly to Charles himself. Here are some of the suggestions I submitted to make the spectacle more modern and entertaining. First, the Budweiser Clydesdales pulling the coach, with Elton John actually driving it in bedazzled cowboy gear. Then, instead of Zadok the priest, they should play Prince, Let's Go Crazy. And Charles could appear in those chaps that Prince sometimes wore on stage. And I think Charles needs a new moniker. Instead of Charles III, maybe he should go by Chucky Trips. They can probably forego the phallic symbols. Everyone already knows they're getting royally screwed. Maybe just hand Charles a microphone after he's crowned so he can yell, "I'm Chucky Trips," and drop the mic, walking away in his chaps. Then, this is optional, from a hatch in the ceiling, thousands of rubber could drop onto the crowd. I mean, if you're going to go phallic, just go phallic. And something for the balcony scene worthy of Game of Thrones. You invite Pope Francis to stand with him. Recall, Denise Diderot once said we'd never be truly free until the last king was strangled with the entrails of the last pope. So, if they took my advice at the coronation, spoiler alert, Pope Francis was disemboweled and Charles III was swinging from the balcony by intestines that smelled like Francis's breakfast. I hope they took my advice. If they did, brave new world, folks. This is anarchist prisoner Sean Swain from the Super Duper Uber Mega Ultra Hyper Turbo Multi Maxi Max in Youngstown, Ohio. If the only version of God Save the Queen you know was played by the Sex Pistols, you are the resistance.
You can still write Sean at his new old new again address at Sean Swain, number A243205, OSP Youngstown, 878 Coitesville Hubbard Road, Youngstown, Ohio 44505. You can find his past writings, updates on his case, hear his past audio, find out how to get his books, plus ways to contribute to his legal defense fund at seanswain.org. This is The Final Straw Radio. This show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions and suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net or thefinalstrawradio@protonmail.com. If you'd like to use any episode for your project or radio show, feel free to do so. Just send us an email to let us know. If you care to, you can send us letters at TFSR, P.O. Box 6004, Asheville, North Carolina, 28816. This show is brought to you by Firestorm Books. Located at 610 Haywood Road in West Asheville, Firestorm Books is a worker-owned cooperative in Asheville specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a catalog of Firestorm's books and zines, plus a full calendar of events at their website, firestorm.coop.
That's what friends are for. 'Cause dirt on you is dirt on me, and we both know our hands ain't clean. If it all blows up and we end up on the news, if you go down, I'm going down too. If you go down, I'm going down too, yeah. All your secrets by the dozen. You know where my skeletons sleep. Hypothetically, if you ever kill your husband, hand on the Bible, I'd be lying through my teeth.